I would love to kick us off. So, hello everyone, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Birkan, leading product here at Enterpret, and I'm really excited about today's conversation. We titled this webinar, Why Product Teams Struggle Despite More Customer Feedback. And honestly, if that title hit a nerve when you first saw it, you're in the right place. Here's the thing, product teams have never had more data, more tools, more AI at their fingertips, and yet teams feel less confident about what to build next. And that paradox is actually what we're going to unpack today. I'm thrilled to be joined by John Cutler. If you're in the product world, you probably already know John. He's the author of The Beautiful Mess, one of the most widely read newsletters in the product management area. And he's currently the head of product at Dotwork. And he's spent years at companies like Amplitude, Pando, and Zendesk thinking deeply about product and how product organizations actually work and why sometimes they often don't. John, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much.
Amazing, amazing. Before we jump in, a quick note for the audience. We are going to keep this conversational. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat and I'll try my best to weave them as we go. And then towards the end, we will have a Q&A session as well. And with that, I would love to kick us off. So John, I know you've also written a lot about this. This is also top of mind in the news cycles as well. We hear this a lot. AI is making things easier and faster to build than ever before. And now the most important question is actually becoming what to build first. How should the product leaders think about this shift? What do you think?
Well, one thing that's important to keep in mind is that I actually think that this idea that the engineering team was this massively precious resource that needed to be protected was an anti-pattern. So, even 10 years ago, thinking about it, when you're in an organization and you think that every engineer's time is so precious that you can't experiment, that you can't connect engineers with customers. I remember being at a company where we would get in a van and go with engineers and go with the whole team out to go on site with a customer. So it was a vertical B2B SaaS company. And so one thing I would say is I think that people need to first unclick that idea. Now, I think that AI has definitely changed the picture on that. But if you go into the current environment thinking with that mindset, right, that, now that problem has been resolved. Now we can open up the floodgates for our customers. We're going to ship all this stuff. We're going to do all these things. You're going to be in for a bit of a rude awakening as you're delivering things for your customers. Anyone who's worked at a company that ships a lot and ships quickly knows that your problem shifts to, did customers absorb the change? Are they using what you said they would do? What's the feedback loop coming back into the picture? And so I think the first thing is to just keep in mind that it's not like we've gone from engineers as the most precious resource that must be defended and everything has to be figured up upstream of them to some magical utopia now that has been unblocked. And now you can just solve all your problems. You need to be extremely methodical about learning. And it's funny, when I was at Amplitude, there was someone there named Tanner McGrath. He went on to work at Runway. And he had this great line, which is, are we shipping faster than we learn or learning faster than we ship? And what we found at Amplitude was that many companies were shipping faster than they could learn. Now, there were some companies that were just slow to deliver that were learning faster than they ship. But a lot more companies than you would expect were shipping faster than you could learn. So I think that, AI obviously plays a role in this, gives us new technologies to solve this problem. But I think it's just, it really shifts the emphasis to learning speed versus necessarily shipping speed. And I think that that's probably like a beneficial thing in the long run, but it feels very painful, I bet, to people right now at the moment.
Yes, 100%, 100%. I think we are seeing an evolution where speed is getting commoditized a little bit. And as you said, now everybody can develop new features, test their hypotheses, etc. But I think it seems like the differentiating factor is going to become the learning loop, the feedback loop. How can you test and learn faster, fail faster, get better and improve on? And I'm curious to hear your perspective. What do you think that separates the teams that shipped fast, learn fast from the ones that don't?
Well, I think that one thing is definitely true, that architecture matters. And people are sometimes surprised when I say that as a product person, where I go immediately to architecture. But let's not forget that the sheer ability to be able to ship quickly, hide some of the stuff you're doing behind feature flags, CI/CD, getting things out there safely is almost a prerequisite. So if you can't do that now, what I find is kind of funny is teams with bad delivery practices is just being amplified now. They should go and use AI to solve their CI/CD problems and feature flagging problems and infrastructure problems before they go and start running all these new features through their old process to be able to do it. So let's just put that to the side for the moment because I think it is very important and that people definitely underestimate that. The second thing I think is this happy balance between the role of discovery and absorbing customer feedback and just getting out there and talking to people, and then the desire to kind of ship and get prototypes in front of people. And I say that it's a happy balance because, look, I had some background as a UX researcher, and I can tell for sure that a skilled UX researcher with a team is massively de-risking the effort. There are many things you can learn, quote unquote, without having to deliver.
Mhm.
Now, at the same time, you've got all this new power to be able to prototype quickly and get things out. And people think it's free now. Well, it's not free for your customers that you're testing it on, right? It's not free for everyone. So I do think that it goes back to the basics of finding that happy balance between discovery, digging into customer feedback, really framing a mental model and perception of the problem. And now we do have some abilities to get more things in front of customers and have them touch it and use it, but you should kill your darlings. So what I would say is like, imagine a team that was shipping 80 things a quarter. The metrics aren't great. Like 80% of that stuff just never moved the needle. Okay, great. So you're down to a small number. Now, if all you do is you ship 3 times that amount and you're still at 80% not moving the needle, it doesn't matter how smart you are. You've added a lot of complexity to your product that has to be maintained and navigated through to particular things. So the best teams have always been the teams that move that curve over through a balance, I think, of discovery and building a mental model of the problem and doing that and de-risking and then delivery. I'd add one point that I think is funny is that people think in software we've developed, invented prototyping. Well, prototyping has been a part of every design activity since the age of time. The minute you were building a chair and you built V1 and said, can you sit in this chair? And it broke, that was a form of prototyping. So we haven't invented prototyping. I think AI makes prototyping a bit easier, but I think ultimately it's the teams that shift that curve meaningfully to the right in terms of their batting average and then use all the tools at their disposal to be able to do it.
100%, 100%. I think this deeply resonates with me because, like, as part of my role, I'm also talking to fellow product leaders in the industry, and this comes a lot because you're right, the AI is accelerating how we build. But if you don't have a clear understanding on the customer problem, like if you're not doing enough discovery, then essentially you might just be churning through the wrong bets. You're just churning them faster, right? And I
Yeah,
think the discovery becomes very important because this happened to me as a product leader in my past
yeah,
experiences as well. You know your power users, like you already have some of those, like champions where they use your product. And whenever you're doing discovery, you end up yourself talking to the same group of power users again and again. That causes
yeah,
two problems. You essentially tire those power users out with one more user research session, one more user research session. But more importantly, you're also having a selection bias about what to build. And
yeah,
oftentimes, this kind of discovery already exists in the customer conversations, the feedback that you're getting from your customers already, but you're not
yeah.
tapping into that resource as much as you should. So that was also another learning from my own career experience as well. And
Oh, definitely. One thing that resonates there is I worked at a company where we would make a huge group activity to go through the qualitative part of MPS. We had sort of put it's a debate for another day, but we put the qualitative parts there, and we trained people a little bit on just you know human level high skilled tagging. We didn't have 3 categories. We had a tag cloud of 15 or 20 categories. As you evolved that, you could add things to the tag categories. We created a graph of the tag categories behind the scenes. This is human AI, right? The human LLM. And one thing that was fascinating about that was you still had to remind people this is only a selection bias of people who filled out an NPS survey. I worked at Pendo and we had an NPS product. We would find that some of the NPS surveys stayed on screen for like 60 days. It was just under the fold. I mean, you don't know who's filling this out. And so we started to expand that activity to the support things. But of course, at the time, what happened was we hit this sort of natural cognitive limit. There's a great talk from 2015 called Connected UX. And I forget who writes it, but you can Google it. And it just talks about like there are techniques in UX research to very thoughtfully curate the research, tag it, align it, use good UX research practices to be able to understand what the feedback is. I think realistically, I've known people who watched that video and got inspired in their company to try it. It's very, very difficult. It's very like there are people in the world who know how to do it well, like they're almost like librarians of research, but most companies can't afford to have lots of these particular folks. And even when they do it, sometimes it creates a walled garden around the research too. Anyway, long story to say that we were the human LLM team,
Yeah.
but ultimately you hit a limit. We couldn't do more because we couldn't operate. And so I think that the advantage now that, in a kind of human in the loop, or at least humans understanding what's happening and understanding that process and evaluate it properly, you can extend that window out to more data, but we were doing it right, but we were still limited. And so I
Mhm.
think this is the big opportunity if you do it right.
100%. We also, come across this in our conversations with our customers, with our prospects as well here at Enterpret. Oftentimes, like when you're early in your journey as a company, you might be getting a very small volume of customer feedback. And honestly, like as a founder, as the VP of product leader,
Yeah.
like you should just read all of that feedback because at the end of the day, all that context can fit into your mind. But then as you grow, as you start getting more traction, as the feedback
Yeah.
volume goes higher, just as you said, like that kind of manual synthesis, manual tagging becomes overwhelming. And what ends up happening is that you start having duplicative tags. You start having, like only
Right.
extracting one team
It's a
from a
full-time job to just manage that system, right?
exactly,
Which is
exactly.
which is difficult. The other thing to point out there, I like this. Let's go down this route here too, because we had to train people to do it. So we were the human evaluators of a human system to be able to do it. We couldn't get the customer success team or the support team or the sales team to do that.
Yes.
So not only, so there's this balancing act where you got a group of skilled people who could do it but couldn't scale themselves. We tried to scale ourselves. We couldn't scale ourselves beyond a certain point, but you had groups where the skill level to do this kind of tagging, remove yourself, and you're try to remove your biases is very, very hard to do it. We would replicate it. We would send it to 3 people and see if they tagged it the same way. Like this is the human LLM. At the end of the day, you couldn't get sales to do that. You couldn't get support to do that. And then you get these poor folks in customer success and sales. They're trying to verbalize the trends they're seeing, but they're not trained to debias that feedback. And then it comes out like, we just need to build this, or I'm hearing X. And so I think that that idea of like scaling the skill set, if you're in UX research and you know you're skilled and your small team is skilled, and you could even train your PMs to be somewhat skilled, that's already biasing the feedback you're using. And then the question was like, well, what AI provides an opportunity. What if we could upskill to get people to a 6 or a 7 level triaging capability across the org? It's really, really compelling at that point to think about it. But I'm going back to skill, scale. You're scaling the skill in addition to scaling the amount of feedback you can process and things. And I think that's critical for people to keep in mind.
Yes, absolutely. And I think you also touched up a great point because it's not that people don't want to listen to their customers, right? Like every
Right.
leader out there, like every function lead, like sales leader, support leader, customer success leader, product leader, of course they want to pay attention. But
Yeah.
without a single unified understanding of your customer reality, what ends up happening is essentially every function creates their own isolated understanding.
Yeah.
And that also creates divergent conclusions when you're thinking about what should we build next in the upcoming quarter. And
Yeah.
even though, like you may have the human power to do the manual tagging, that will result in a divergent conclusion that will result in different interpretation of your same customer truth. And, having an infrastructure to align, to create that kind of unified understanding is a big unlock for the product organizations, especially as your company gets larger and larger.
I think you bring up an amazing point, though. So I would, it's not a challenge of what you said, but to get people thinking about it, you want divergent reality. Then you want to be able to, that's the product's job. If convergent reality existed all the time, and the consensus reality is often not what you want.
Exactly.
The problem in B2B SaaS is that you've got these like highly interrelated segments of customers. It's not, every marketing team, or look, I've been on a product marketing team and they said, we've got the analysts, we've got the PMs, and we've got the leaders. And then you do an analysis of those personas and you realize, no, like maybe we've got 18 overlapping Venn diagrams here. Like if you do a psychographic study of the people and you think about their background. So this is, to me, is the opportunity and the challenge is that if you chase consensus and convergence, you will get convergence and consensus. The tools are extremely good at persuading you that you have that. Your job as a product manager, or UX or leader, or whatever, is to explore divergence. And so the tools that are working, so this is the challenge when someone says, like, well, what's a trend that you see? And it gives you some confirmatory thing. What you're looking for is the black swans, like the things at the edges, because that's often to do this. And I have like a great story about this for feedback. So I did work at this property management company. So you think you rent your apartment, whatever. So now the people who rent you your apartment are called property managers. They sent oodles of feedback like we need to track keys. We need to track keys. It's a huge problem. So in every property management company, they have a wall that has like 1,000 keys for all the properties that they let themselves into. And we would get tons of this feedback. And it was the one feedback that said, I don't care about the freaking key wall anymore. My job, what I'm trying to do is let people into apartments. I don't want to manage that key wall anymore. Now, again, it's just the thing is like if you saw the trend, it would like, we must build a tagging system for keys. The great story though, at that company during a hack day, they built keyless entry to allow people to get in, and people are like, you're geniuses. So if you want to be a genius, look for the divergence and look for creative ways to resolve that divergence, not necessarily the convergence. And tools that let you, that's what I'm on the lookout for, tools that do this, is if it's not challenging me and showing me the divergence, something's wrong. And that's usually my clue to find a new tool or dig deeper, basically, to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And also, like, to me, I think this is one of the key responsibilities of a successful product manager as well. Like when you're
Yeah.
listening to the customers, understanding their pain points,
Yeah.
not letting that pain point to exactly dictate what you should build. Because like in
Right.
this example, maybe the naive solution is okay, like we should just build a key wall. But again,
Yeah.
if you continue to ask the question like why, go one level deeper each time, then essentially you get into a more magical solution, which is like a keyless entry system that solves
Yeah.
the customer problem at the root rather than just patching it. So this is a great example as well. John, I would
Yeah.
love to shift gears a little bit and talk about one of my favorite posts from your writing, your thinking. You recently launched a post around like seeing everything, understanding nothing. Like,
Right.
by the way, I love the title. And in that article, you wrote about what you call the context trap.
Yep.
And the idea, from my understanding, is the idea here is that like mostly there's street understanding is a transmission problem. Like if you
Mm.
give your teams enough context, the alignment will follow.
Right.
But there's an argument to be made is that like AI is actually making this worse, not better. Because like
Yeah.
now you're using Claude, we're using ChatGPT, like manually uploading our customer feedback, our strategy documents, etc., creating this kind of like an isolated understanding. But I would love for you to unpack that a little bit more.
Yeah. So the thesis that I had is that when I look on LinkedIn, I'm currently seeing mostly single player mode AI. Oh my God, I've been told by my bosses that I need to use AI to be more efficient. So I've spent the whole weekend to make my whole Claude system. I'm all set up. Now, what we've heard at Dotwork, we're in this sort of strategy space, is you hear examples of 200 PMs dumping the same 2,000 row CSV into an LLM to try to learn something. Now, so like think about that for a second. So we have this single player mode idea that like Birkan, okay, I'm going to give you my context, you give me your context. We'll look at the context of the customer data, etc. And then what we're going to get from that is we'll get reality. Like if we combine our context, in theory, we get our reality. But what I notice is that just sort of goes against general ideas of cognition. When you are engaging with customer feedback, you are creating context. The context doesn't stop at the customer feedback that said this is broken. When you're talking to another PM and wrapping your head around it, when you're trying to make sense of this, when you're maybe tweaking the weights of whatever system you're using to try to understand it, you are actively generating context. A pre-read, I call it the difference between the pre-read and the meeting. The pre-read is, hey, everyone, here's the context. You got the context? Now, we all know that the pre-read is the start of the meeting, not the end of the meeting, right? So we're generating all of this context all the time. And in the Shannon model, it's basically like communication is I have to transmit, you need the context, and any noise takes away from it. And what I looked into, something like in 4E cognition or whatever, it talks about the idea that cognition is something that's felt, it's embodied, it's extended in our tools and our systems, and it happens in interaction. It's enacted. That's one of the E's of the four E's: embodied and extended, etc. And so what's hypercritical for people to realize here is that the way people are treating AI at the moment is literally PTSD for anyone who's involved in knowledge management or source of any of those disciplines for the last 30 years. It's like, it's just a different flavor. It's just a different source of the same problem. But the powerful thing, I think, the way at least, so our thesis at something like Dotwork is, if you can get really good at collecting, we call it managed context. What's your context under management? How much could you really rely on, and how is it evolving, and is it kept fresh? And when you add context to it, so if I get a gong call from a strategy meeting, do I paste it into the app and it goes and it finds our strategic initiatives and just kind of notes the update or something like that to be able to do it? That to me is where this is going. That's multiplayer mode to be able to do it. And so I think the huge trap people need to imagine is that now, because everyone's being pushed into Claude and imagining, they're worried for their career, they're building, they're vibe coding their things, they're losing out on the potential opportunity for enacting context together, is creating new context together. And that was basically the thesis that I came up with.
100%. Like, I think that's very interesting. I would love to maybe like dig deep into it a little
Yeah.
bit more, because like I think as part of that transmission, like now we have dashboards, like your maybe VoC team, voice of the customer team, publishes these type of quarterly reports about what your customers are saying, etc. I think actions leading to information and that information leading to intelligence is actually a very interesting way of thinking about it. Oftentimes what we are seeing from our customers, from the companies, product leaders that we talk to, is that because of AI, your build speed is increasing.
Yeah.
You're essentially opening yourself to an opportunity where you can continuously learn from your customers. But if you don't have the right infrastructure in place, your VoC, your voice of the customer processes, can still run on a quarterly clock.
Yeah.
And that essentially creates a snapshot of learning instead of a continuous learning opportunity. And I think this also fits into nicely into that, like, are you enacting this feedback? Are you actively learning
That's a
from your
great
edge?
the way that this hopefully will stick with people. The tool I've been using lately is calling making nouns verbing. So think about it this way. We think, you just said, we have our VoC report every quarter. What if that's a verb? That's something that you're doing, right? There's something that you're doing all the time. It's like when teams talk about having an initiative, I say you're initiativing. An initiative is not real. It's just an imaginary label we put on some amount of activity that we're doing as a company. It lives on the roadmap or whatever. The same thing with customer feedback. It's customer feedback. No, it's not. Any UX researcher tells you it's the engagement with the feedback itself that is the thing. It's the verb that is the thing. So these VoC teams and people doing this, I feel that with the existing technologies, the people who do it well, or prior to AI or prior to thinking about it, even they would have loved to be able to track those insights onto potential actions. Or put it this way, they would try very, very hard to do that, right? Because they were trying to justify these large efforts to do it. And I love those folks, because in most companies, doing VoC or customer feedback was an unloved job. It was hard and they had to do it. But it's tying it to the particular actions in the product. And like right now, doing something quarterly, it's sort of, it's out of date for the first 2 weeks into the next thing. So I think that also, funny story there. I worked with a VoC team once, and I said, well, what if you ran it in the middle of the quarter? They said, what do you mean? I said, well, quarters are the most stressful times for your target customer. Why are you running it when they're trying to close the books? And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, try running it in the middle of the quarter. And it's like the MPS, they were using MPS shot up like 20 points. All the feedback was about all the higher level problems they were having. It wasn't like just about closing the books. So when you do something once a quarter, that's just that couldn't ask for a better example, because it just happens to be the case. But whatever your industry is, if you're not doing this more continuously, you're losing out on a lot of things. At Amplitude, we would say that, like, you only have that one shot to get the first 7 days of people interacting with your product. In most B2B settings, they've acclimated, they have their workarounds, they don't even notice. I've sat on UX research calls where someone's doing the dumbest thing with our product is dumb. They are not dumb. I'm saying my product was dumb and they were working around it like nothing had ever been that. And so you've got that. So that's a great example of where, you do these cyclical VOC things and sometimes they segment it by how long has used the product, but you kind of lose the thread a little bit. You have to be doing this continuously and segmenting of the particular people. I have something to share actually that gives people a picture of this. I remember something to show you. So this is at Amplitude. None of this is confidential, but to talk about how much work sometimes goes into this, like this is us. I know Manan, maybe he's on the call, but this is us just trying to like carefully tag personas. And so when anytime someone thinks, well, we've got 3 personas really. So we tag one, we tag the next. Each one of this takes 20 minutes and we're doing it together with another person. More humans. This is me doing it dozen times, more times. And so I wanted to give people a picture of the human LLM problem. This isn't the same company, but this ability to try to think about the humans you're dealing with as they are, not just as your marketing categories or, what are the real clusters of humans is critical for this because each one of those multiplied by their customer journey, there's almost 150 variations. This as a product manager in this space, but it's like AI gives us an intense opportunity to break through that oversimplification if you use it correctly, which I think is what's exciting about your product and others. But it's like, I don't know if the visual help people, like this is the problem.
Yes, 100%, 100%. And honestly, like we touched upon a couple of different problems so far, right? Like one of them was, like as the feedback volume scales, like doing this tagging on a manual manner, it's not going to scale, right? Like you're
Yeah.
not going to extract the rich insights. Even if you can do it within one sliver of your organization, let's say your customer success team
One
is
data
doing it.
set. Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
It's
Yeah.
just creating an isolated understanding because your sales team are also having rich conversations. You're also learning a lot from your product conversations, etc. So like
Yeah.
then the missing piece, the next problem is becoming like, how can you create this kind of a shared understanding across all the functions in your organization, across all your
Yeah.
customer conversations? And then the third problem that we talked about is also about this. Okay, because of this is hard, people tend to do this once a quarter. But now we are
Yeah.
shipping on a weekly, daily basis. So we are missing out on that continuous learning opportunity. And your competitors who switch to this kind of a continuous learning mechanism will outlip
Yeah.
you on a day-to-day basis. So that was like the third problem we talked about. And then
Yeah.
the fourth problem is interesting because these AI tools are amazing, right? Like you can copy paste your customer feedback, you can connect to back MCP, you can upload your granular transcripts, etc. But it ends up creating a very single player understanding of your customer conversation. So,
Right.
for
You're not
example,
adding to it. You're not adding to it as your team, which is, I
exactly,
think that's the thing that's important.
exactly.
Digging on that point, this is the thing PMs are going to need to think about changing. If all you're using is AI to check the boxes on all the old stage gate activities that you did before. I mean, I talked to a team the other day. It was crazy. We do this kind of strategy software. The leaders had gone to an offsite and had a wonderful offsite. Now, in the last couple hours of the offsite, they're like, well, we have to have some goals for this, don't we? So what did people do? You started hitting the LLMs. Like, we've got 3 hours left. We want to go and have drinks at the whatever. Everyone's been at that offsite, right? Where you're like, I just want out of here, right? They use the LLMs and create the goals. Now, the goals, this is talking to the leader. They said, you know what? Now, looking back on it, the goals were like a 6.5 out of 10. Like they could have been sharper, right? Now, what's the problem? Those goals became another set of goals. The next goals were like a 4.5. Those goals became PRDs. Now, the PRDs by that point, like definitely a robot could written them. They're like, oh my God, I'm going to build this here thing. And then by the time it became the tasks or whatever. So one point to add to this is that if you're just using AI to reinforce the old stage gates or the old things that you used to do to be able to get through the hoops and jump through the hoops and do those things, you're definitely going to fail in this. So yeah, just bridging on your point.
Yeah, 100%. And honestly, like we see this from some of our customers that we talk to, some of our prospects that we talk to. Essentially, like every PM start using the LLMs to connect to their Slack, like granular
Yeah.
transfer, etc. But then what ends up happening is that you get these MD files, HTML presentations
Yeah.
stored in your downloads folder. You have
Yeah.
those, I have those, your teammate has those. Like, how do you bring them together? Like, what is that shared unified understanding across the board to drive the future alignment of what to build. And I
Yeah.
think that's kind of like one of the risks of, oh yeah, AI tools can also connect to these feedback sources and generate the reports. Yes, but it can lead into this kind of a isolated understanding, like very ephemeral single player understanding of your customer realities as well.
I think one of the things that's really important that you said there too is that company strategies are often built on extremely hard won and sometimes spiky insights, convictions.
Mhm.
Conviction is not built in a markdown file. Conviction is built by pressure testing back and forth. The conviction is building. You don't get conviction. So now, if we're offloading, if we're sending our conviction to markdown files, and if you've worked in a company, your point about the goal here is to extract those insights that set it's like a Greek myth that set sail 1,000 ships on your team. It's not every little thing. Now, by working through that data is how you build the conviction. So I would say that, conviction sometimes comes from the data and it's sometimes coming like we built conviction. Conviction is also a shared understanding, multiplayer mode type thing. So yeah, markdown files are not going to build your conviction. In fact, what people are doing in companies is to avoid conviction with markdown files. It's like a shock and awe strategy. I'll just send you this huge markdown file or you'll be able to do it. So I think that I've been noticing the same thing where I talked to a leader yesterday. They made a great point that a positive interpretation of they called it the single player phase of this adoption, where it's a lot easier for people to explore single player at the moment to do it, is that maybe the best benefit will become like the elaboration of skills or the ability for teams to share. That's a little bit multiplayer. Like I share a
Mhm.
skill with you, Birkan, to be able to do X. It's kind of like we're working together. But what they made the point is that that's just this temporary blip right now. The quest for a multiplayer mode is up here, and we're trying to get up there at the moment. Yeah, drop your
100%.
questions. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, I see that Ravish mentioned that, so we're happy to answer them as well.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And we'll also have a, like dedicated session at the end as
Yeah,
well, like a Q&A session. John, like I also would love to learn more from you in one particular area. Like we are talking about this like single player mode, like LLMs
yeah,
are so powerful that they can connect to these feedback sources, etc. One of the other challenges that we're hearing from our customers, from our prospects, is that essentially when you, of course, like everybody can download a CSV file of their Zendesk tickets, like
right,
500,
right, right.
5,000. Everybody can, like connect their LLMs to a Slack channel, etc.
Yeah,
But then the feedback, the customer insight is actually just beyond that raw text of feedback, right? Like
right.
there's a user behind that feedback. That user might belong to an account. That account might
Yeah,
have a sales opportunity. So one of the challenges that we're hearing is that yes, with the LLMs connecting to the source, you can do a good enough job by doing a volume-based prioritization.
right, right, right,
But
right.
we know that, like volume-based prioritization might be misleading because you said it at the beginning.
Yeah,
Sometimes volume-based measurement measures the willingness to give you feedback,
yeah,
but it
yeah,
may not provide you the economic value of the user behind that feedback or the
right.
account behind that feedback. Like, can you please maybe tell us a little bit more about like how should we think about the broader context when we are trying to learn as we are acting on these kind of feedback? Like, what is that importance of the business context to make you more informed product strategy and roadmap decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the trillion-dollar question, right? Which is you've got all these systems, and then it's easy for everyone to say our systems are disconnected. It's, okay, our systems are disconnected. Um, and now we think we're going to connect all our systems, which is kind of going back to customer 360 for anyone who remembers that, or source of truth or anything like that. So, okay, we're going to connect our systems to be able to do it. And I think that, I mean, very, very practically, you have the equivalent of you do need to maintain some kind of context graph to be able to do it. And so, not to get too nerdy about it, but like at Dotwork, we think about the ontology, we think about the knowledge graph, we think about the data schema that supports it. Um, the the point that I want to make though is that crap in, crap out with all of those particular systems. So I think it's kind of steps. Like what you're talking about is a perfect step. Like please, when you're reading that customer's feedback, know that this is $1 million a year account, not a $10,000 a year account. And so, connecting those particular systems and make sense of it, definitely important. And then it's like you go up a level And not only are you just seeing it in the same place, like, okay, when I was looking at the feedback, I saw this other stuff. You're using that information to be able to draw inferences that go beyond a simple thing. So the example we gave before is really interesting, where most companies were limited a bit to, did they fall into one of three segments? And are they in their first 30 days of onboarding? Like that's basically how everything was pivoted in the systems. So now we're kind of even going up levels with AI where it's reasoning about that context graph and the weights that you should be providing things. So then you're going into systems and saying, this is $1 million account, but if you look at their activity data and amplitude, they're actually using the product more than we might assume from the persona that we've assumed from their other behavior. Oh, you notice that you put in the system, you ask people to self-identify. We noticed this at Amplitude. You ask people like what their role is. And then we would ask them like, no, what's your real job? And they would say, oh, yeah, expletive. I'm like the shit umbrella or something like that. Like my job, I actually am analyst and PM. I am actually these different things. And that to me is like the next step. So it's like in the beginning, there's nothing. Then you're just literally seeing the data next to each other. Then you're reasoning about that particular, that context. But then you're even going way deeper than the systems have. You're injecting back insights. So then instead of dealing, like I showed you that chart in the screenshot, instead of dealing with marketing simplified drop down menu of the three personas, you're actually crafting a much deeper understanding of context. And then ideally, like humans are interacting with that. So that's kind of how I see it, where we say context and we say these things, or we say context graph or knowledge graph. There's really a huge spectrum until how evolved those things are in a company at the moment.
100%. And Hazik also mentioned this in the chat as well. Maybe I can also like answer
Yeah.
this as part of my reply. John, you're 100% correct. I really deeply resonate with what you said. Essentially, today, all that business context is scattered across function-specific tools, right? Like you may
Yeah.
have your CRM data, in your CRM application, your customer feedback residing on, Zendesk, etc. You have your product analytics, etc. But in order to fully understand that economic value of the feedback, that user behind that feedback, account behind that feedback, you need a context graph. And honestly,
Yeah.
this is one of the problems that we try to solve here at Enterpret. We connect to your feedback sources, but that's only the beginning. Then we
Right.
also connect to your user tables, your account tables, your CRM data. And this helps us create that kind of a rich customer context graph
Yeah.
that enables you to quantify your feedback, not just based on the volume, but also based on the business impact, such as the
Yeah.
revenue impact, CSAT impact, NPS impact. And now, as a PM, when you're thinking about your planning cycle, okay, what should we prioritize for Q4, Q2, Q3,
Yeah.
etc., you can do these kind of analysis from that rich data set. And one
Yeah.
of the other follow-ups that I wanted to ask you is because, like, we are living in a B2B world, right? Like in a work environment, you have access to so many tools.
Yeah.
Oftentimes you don't need just one more dashboarding tool.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
like one of the things that we are trying to do here at Enterpret is that we don't want these rich customer insights to be trapped inside of our own UI. And
Right.
that's why, like investing heavily into like MCP servers so that we can bring these insights into the work tools, like into where other
Yeah.
conversations happens, where decision happens, like Claude, ChatGPT, Slack, Linear, Jira, etc. How do you think about that? Like, how do you think these customer insights are getting embedded into your workflows where decision happens?
Yeah. I mean, I think that um, the UXer in me is going to say you have to be where people are doing their work, because if you're not, you're going to have a hard time being effective, right? So when I see the broad impact of this, it's like if people are in these tools and if they're using them, that's exactly where we're investing in that type of stuff too. Because, for example, again, we go back to this idea of managed context. In our space, if you look at like ticketing systems or some OKR tool, you're lucky if that has 5 to 10% of the actual context. Like there's a reason why leaders don't look at the dashboards of these tools. Look at Pendo, at Amplitude, everywhere. Everyone would say, oh my God, we've got the best idea now. We're going to come up with the leader dashboard. We're
Mhm.
going to come, and now all that's been replaced with, we're going to come up with the leader chatbot. It's the same problem that we had before, but it is crap in, crap out,
Mhm.
right? To be able to do that. And so while I think that the surface is important, it's like it's a basic, you need to be where people are.
Mhm.
doing those particular things. I do think ultimately anyone who's building these products, if you get pulled away by the surface of the surface of the day is skills, the surface of the day is agents, the surface of the day is X. We don't even know what the surfaces of tomorrow will look like. So you almost need to assume that the surfaces and the like today, it used to be agents, now it's skills with agents. You can pretty reliably say that in 6 to 9 months, it's going to be like agents with skills and then some other new word or some other thing to do it. I'd say for most people, the basic principle is you need to be where people are making their decisions, right, to be able to do that. And it ultimately boils down to how valuable your managed context is behind those particular things. Because if you don't have that at that point, you're not going to be able to do that. One interesting thing from our world too is like, I would suggest everyone also challenge what they think. Like here is a big thing for me. I hate slides in general. I used to be involved in an investment bank where I needed to create slides overnight. That was my graveyard shift job, was just making slides. So I have this ingrown, I hate slides. What we've been learning at Dotwork is that like slides are actually a pretty effective communication mechanism for the way people are creating context. So it challenged me to think about it, like for a
Mhm.
year I was like, I just want them to use my tool. I just want them to do that. And now I'm thinking like, look, I don't mind if they're plugging into Claude. Like heck, if they want to bring up what we're doing and just show it in a slideshow, I'm game to be able to do it. So your customers will tell you the surfaces they're using is generally my principle for that.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And honestly, like as long as once you have that context layer, then meeting your users where they work, where those decisions happens through these
Yeah.
extensibility surfaces, I think the world is also evolving into that direction as well. And
Well, and your internal tools that you're either building or purchasing, because right now what you're seeing is, I mean, it's crazy out there. Basically, if you put AI next to what you're doing, it's like, oh, you get the fast track past the RFP. I call it the ChatGPT RFP for our business. It's like if you're considered SaaS, then suddenly you've got to fill out 60 questions about what you do for an enterprise deal. But if you say that you're AI, it's like, oh, please come over to this other door and you can talk to us about what you're doing. So a lot of you are probably building or evolving these tools. I really do think that the partners you pick and their philosophy is critical. So
Mhm.
pick companies who understand where their differentiator is, that are not just following the fashion of the day. So if they say, like, I don't know, Interpret wants to be best at the world at building a meaningful context graph around customer feedback. This is a decade long problem. We're going to keep working on it. The surface of the day is MCP, but that's not the easy part, but that's like the icing on the cake. We're committed to meet you where you are. That's a good partner to have, because a lot of people are throwing money at tools right now where the founders and the companies are just obsessed by the surface of the day.
Yeah.
And that is going to waste your time internally if you're trying to build out these solutions. So I guess just be critical of the vendors and partners and try to analyze their strategy for the long term versus the surface of the day is pretty important.
100%. I think very well said. I think you framed it perfectly, John. Like essentially at Enterpret, we are trying to position customer intelligence as the foundational layer of your
Yeah.
product operating system. This is almost like as critical as your AI tech stack, your data
Yeah.
warehouse, CI/CD pipelines. Once we establish that infrastructure layer for your customer intelligence, then the surface can change. Surfaces can come and go, but that intelligence layer will
Yeah.
be persistent. That will be the durable, persistent layer for your
Yeah.
organization. All right. I know we covered a lot of ground, and I would love to open it up for some Q&A at this point. I know there's one question from Leah. I would love to, read it out loud. What
Sure.
guidance would you give to a PM starting a new role? A unique opportunity to start with a clean slate with AI to build the right structure for understanding customers in a way that's going to lead to strong bets quickly. What should
Hmm.
they do on day one to be able to do X by day 30?
Oh, it's such a good one. I mean, the first, just to go back to the basics, um, put AI to the side for like 2 weeks and just entrench yourself manually in the thinking behind your business before you build any of these particular tools, right? Because you have this moment when you start a role to have fresh eyes. And if you rely on the AI tools that your company has, they will not have fresh eyes. They're going to be bought into whatever Kool-Aid you're selling. So the first thing to do for 2 weeks is to definitely use your brain for the first couple of weeks to be able to do it. I think that I I think that the first thing probably is to try to build an alliance with folks who are trying to solve this internally. And so, especially in a company right now, the worst possible thing is that you have maybe like customer success or support teams or other people trying to work out their own solutions. And then you're thinking about a PM solution for your particular space. So, if you have the ability, try to catch the wave that's happening right now across the org versus just within product. Because to what Birkan's been saying, that's where it's going to be really, really powerful. It's almost like without AI, you're going to find your power users, you're going to find your people. That's not the difficult part. So, for example, if you see a company wide effort, a procurement effort, or anything that's kind of guiding this across the company, I would try to get actively involved in the pilot of that particular thing because that's one way you'll learn about the tools and learn about your company, but also be able to influence potentially being able to get a good stack going. Because I think that as an individual PM, your personal management system, I mean, there's so much online about how you can build Claude for that, et cetera. And maybe you want to prototype with that, but ultimately for your company wide, your time is much better spent trying to influence that in the right direction to solve the problem for real versus hacking it. I don't know. That's probably not a great answer, but yeah, use your brain for the first couple of weeks and then try to influence the decision across the company if you can about the right stack. And then number three, definitely experiment with your personal knowledge management system, but then think like, how do I pressure test this and create shared understanding with other people quickly would be a good one.
That's great. That's great. And by the way, in the meantime, like we will also launch a poll in the chat. And if you would like to continue the conversation with Enterpret, like please go ahead and fill out the form as well. And while you're doing so, there's also one more question from the attendants. How do you deal with constant pressure to build features faster, but you don't have enough time or data to discover the right features to prioritize?
This is one of those in my career. The only way is to show, not tell, really. This is not a logic problem. Um, Anytime I've seen this meaningful shift happen in a company, it's because people have challenged their preconceived notions about what value and what success and what progress and stuff looks like. And I mean, example, I worked with a founder. It was a difficult relationship. It was about 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And I remember I was not successful at the time of talking him into it. Now, 5 years later or 6 years later, he had joined a company and got to work with like it was a different company. And so they got to try things that he saw firsthand. And he came back and he said, "Oh, John, all that product centric way of thinking about it, you were right." Now, that wasn't that great feeling inside, but it did remind me, right, that at the end of the day, it's what you show, not tell. So carve out one opportunity to create a step change for people, or even just a small set of customers. And you probably won't get permission to do that, but don't necessarily ask for it. You just you gotta show that. To give you an analogy there, I worked at a company where someone did that. They walked into a meeting and said, "What if I started making money by tomorrow?" Everyone looked at them and said, "You're crazy." They said, "No, the people up, this is pre-AI. The people upstairs, they generally know how to do it. What if we put a waiting thing on the screen that says processing application? We'll do it in 15 seconds upstairs and then say applied to be able to do it." Next day, they were making money. Everyone who saw that type of experiment, 10 years later, I'll talk to them and they'll say, "Oh, do you remember? Do you remember when we were in that meeting and so said we were going to make money by tomorrow? And then we mechanical turked the problem with the people upstairs and we built that screen in a day and we were making money." So it all goes to show, not tell. It's just like the really, really important part of this to do it.
100% aligned. I think especially in a world where there's this like huge abundance of social posts, etc. Like, how do you cut through the noise?
Yeah.
Like, do you publish these like huge, long wall of text social posts, or do you show your product? And
Yeah.
I'm also like here at Enterpret, we're a very firm believer of show, don't tell. And I
Yeah.
think in order to, differentiate yourself in this crowded market, like that's one of the best ways to get
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah.
I want to be mindful of time, like love to take maybe one more live question and then slowly wrap it up. There's one question from Marion. How would you go about streamlining feedback gathering for a company proposing on-prem software? We have customer interviews, but no way to gather data on a regular basis or know which
Yeah.
features are the most used, for example. If I was to host an in-person feedback session, how would I ensure I gather qualitative feedback without asking questions that are too leading?
Yeah, probably beyond scope for today because there's a lot around, the research techniques and things that we definitely we could pass on some links afterwards about good places to think about that. What I would say, remember, if you're in a space, it's on-prem, your competitors are in a space where it's on-prem, you're playing your game. So then the question is, can you do better than the competitors? So I have a friend here in Santa Barbara. They run a very successful business where they use AI to cool industrial facilities. Hardcore PhD stuff, pre-AI, like machine learning stuff. And my friend Carrie got very creative. She organized an activity. Everyone wants to come to Santa Barbara. So she organized like a week-long activity for their customers to come here and co-develop with them. On-prem software, very regulated, whatever you want to say. She got so creative to make it happen. You're competing against your people, so you need to do better than them. Now, if your competitors are all SaaS companies and they're getting feedback every day, this is a different question. But if your competitors are all on-prem, how do you do 50% better than them or 30%? Do what my friend Carrie did and get really creative. And that's kind of that's generally good advice. You're playing your game that you're playing, and it's important.
That's amazing. That's amazing. John, I would love to quickly wrap up our conversation. I know we're a little bit over time. So let me quickly recap the learnings I had from our conversation so far. So we talked about how AI is accelerating the speed of building, but your speed of learning is also as important. And the real differentiator in this market situation is how fast you learn compared to what you ship. And that's number one. And the second thing is when you have AI who can connect all these type of feedback sources, not just counting the feedback, not just counting the ticket, but also connecting to a business context, understanding the value of that feedback so that you can do not just volume-based prioritization, but also a value-based prioritization. The
Yeah.
importance of that was also came up from our conversations. And then finally, we talked about the importance of moving away from the single player understanding to a multiplayer understanding, how this unified context can beat this isolated insights, isolated understanding. And in order to do that, you might need an infrastructure, like a customer intelligence infrastructure to accomplish that. Before we wrap up, John, I would love to also give you a moment for everyone in the audience who wants to keep following your work. Where can they find you?
Yeah, generally LinkedIn at the moment is a good place. I'll leave people with one thought. Kent Beck, I saw a talk this the other day, and he talks about AI as a genie, and it stuck with me ever. So whenever you're using AI, just imagine there's a genie going, I got you. Like you love it to be able to do that. So I'd leave people with the thought that if there's not divergence and not getting you scratching your head, you're probably doing something wrong. And then you can adapt what you're doing. That was my biggest takeaway. I didn't really put it in those kinds of terms, but you've got the genie. The genie wants to make you very, very happy, boss. Like, hey, boss, I got you what you want. And if you think about multiplayer as a way to dip into the divergence as a team, there's very positive things that can happen from that. That was my big takeaway from today to think
That's
about it.
amazing. That's amazing. That's amazing. And for all the folks in the audience, if you're not subscribed to The Beautiful Mess, please go ahead and do that. I've been a long time follower. It's one of the best reads in the product space that you can listen to and read to. And for everyone joining this call, if what we talked about today resonated, if you're feeling the same tension between having more feedback than ever, but less clarity about what to build it, that's exactly the problem that we are solving here at Enterpret. Enterpret is the customer intelligence platform for product teams, and we help you move from scattered feedback to shared continuous understanding so that your whole organization is working from the same customer reality. You can head to enterpret.com to learn more, see a demo, or just explore. We would love to show you what this looks like in practice. Thank you all so much for spending your time with us today. John, thank you so much. This was such a great conversation. And everyone watching, let's go build the right things. See you next
Yep,
time.
my pleasure. Bye, everyone. See you.